Let's say you were asked to line up your 10 most valuable cards, and you were given no further instructions. How would you define valuable? By dollar amount? By how scarce they are? Aesthetics? What if you were asked to define value as what a card means to you? This is one topic I talk about with today's guest, Rob Gerard, the sports card therapist. Without Rob, there would be no shallow end. That's a topic for another day, because here, today, we have a ranging conversation that left me feeling optimistic about cards and collecting. And I hope to some degree it has the same effect for you. I'm Dave Schwartz. On Instagram, you can find me at Iowa Dave. And in this episode, Rob and I talk about taking short breaks. We talk about cards and kids, mothers and fathers, and a rarely discussed superpower of vintage cards. Welcome to the shallow end. So I'm really excited to finally have on as a guest someone I've talked to behind the scenes lots of times, but have not yet had on. Most of you know him as the sports card therapist. He is Rob Gerard. Rob, thanks for being here.
Dave, thanks for having me on, man. It's an honor to be on your podcast.
Well, this is fantastic. So the reason that I wanted to really talk to you today about cards is heard you talk in the past about some of the meaning that the cards have to you and the way that value goes beyond the dollars and cents of cards. And we'll get to that in just a second. But before we get to talking about how cards matter and how, beyond the money, you and Ken had a fantastic conversation last week in which you were talking about this idea of a national hangover. And when I heard that, it just totally resonated. And I thought that we could talk about that for a few more minutes, because I think this is something that a lot of people feel. And there are other content producers out there and people who aren't even on Instagram, who, just go to LCSs everywhere, who I think feel the same sort of thing. This idea that there's some sort of like a build up to national. And I know that not everybody goes to national, but for those who do, it's like a holiday. It's like the Super Bowl of the hobby. And here we are 3 months later, almost. And some of us are still feeling the effects. So could you just sort of recap what it is that you and Ken were talking about, and this sort of feeling that's in the air of the hobby for so many of us right now?
Yeah, man, and you and I were definitely talking about this before we hit record as well. But it seems like on my podcast, I kind of just, it's not me so much doing a social commentary of the hobby. It's really just me talking about things through my lens, like I think most great content creators do, such as yourself. And through my lens, I felt it the last few years that once September comes around, like once fall really starts to kind of kick into gear, it does feel like I'm like, okay, I need to take a step back, and not a step back from the hobby in general, but yeah, I guess maybe a hobby in general. Because like you said, I mean, when you're going to the national, when you are going there, there's such an excitement about it. It's almost like that excitement you feel when you have a huge vacation coming up, whether if it's going to Walt Disney, going to Paris, going somewhere, and it's coming up. There's no feeling like an upcoming vacation. It's a beautiful thing. And then afterward, I would think that immediately afterward, like with a vacation, you feel that kind of hangover. It's that like immediate letdown. You get home, you're exhausted. You're like, oh my God, now I have nothing to look forward to. But the thing is, with the hobby, for myself, it feels like there's so much national recap stuff, and not only for me to create but also for me to consume. I love hearing about it through everyone else's eyes. Plus there's the huge build up to the NFL season too. So for me it really feels like once September hits, it things kind of like whew, like whoa, hangover. Like, okay, I got to take a step back. I've been going so hard for the last 4 months in this hobby that I think I need to really just kind of take a step back for a minute and catch a breather, if that makes sense.
Yeah, totally. And I think it's only natural, you know. And I went back and looked, and I think the first time that Ken sports card lessons, I think the first time that he mentioned the 2023 national was in a January episode of the Sports Card Lessons show. you know, I think he said it's here. 2023 is here, and now it's time to think about the national. So I think it's only natural, right? That, and I don't think that we should build it up less. I think it is such. I hope that people who have not had a chance to experience it and who want to get the chance to, right, in 2024 or 2025 at some point, because this was my first one anyway, and it met and then exceeded expectations. And yeah, sure, I got some great cards, but just being able to meet people whose voices you've heard, you know, or you've talked to through DMs on social media or whatever, I think that was really what was the highlight for me anyway. And the cards, of course. I love seeing the cards. But yeah, I think just as humans, not to get too deep, but I think we know there needs to be a come down period. I was thinking back to, I had this video, this VHS when I was a kid, and it was hosted by Al Michaels, and it was called Great Sports Moments of the 80s. And it had a top 10 countdown, but if it was just those top 10, it would have been, 5 or 10 minutes. So they put other great moments in there as well that didn't quite make it. And one of them was Magic Johnson's first game, which I think technically was 79, but it was the 79-80 season. And his very first game, Kareem hits a buzzer beater to win. So the Lakers moved to 1-0 on Kareem's buzzer beater, and Magic, who was fresh off the national title at Michigan State, and as we know now, is this beautiful.
He celebrated like they won the championship, right?
He went berserk.
Yeah. I remember that.
He's hugging, he's jumping up and down, he's grabbing Kareem, and he's going berserk. And then in that video, that old VHS video, it then cuts to an interview with Kareem in which he said, "Yeah, I had to sit Magic down after that one because we couldn't keep that emotional pace up the rest of the season." I appreciate his enthusiasm, but we were going to burn out by January if he kept this up. And I think that's sort of what is with the National. We can't keep that up the whole time. There needs to be a downtime. It's why different shows used to have reruns, because the actors need to go on vacation and the writers need to go on vacation. We need a vacation.
I love that analogy. Because that is the way it feels, right? And I think like you were saying with Ken's episode, once like January hits and the actual new year hits, I mean, there are content podcast shows out there that are already counting down to the National 2024. So I think once January comes and you look at that calendar, you're like, okay, let's go. This is game one, first game of the season. Let's go. And yeah, I would agree. And then once, if the National or the month of August feels like the NBA Finals, then yeah, I mean, I think we all deserve a trip to Florida afterward.
Yeah, I think it was Card Talk and Ryan, Card Collector 2, on his first episode after National said, we are 62 days away from the next National. And I heard that and chuckled and thought, no, just a little break. That's kind of what I need, is a little break. But I think a better word might be like a recalibration, right? I think that's a good thing that we can be, or at least me personally, can be doing right now, is figuring out what's important, catching my breath. Kids are back at school. Like you said, football starting, baseball is winding down. It's like the off season in a way, and it's still going on. There's still action, but you don't have to be quite as involved if you don't want to be.
Yeah. And that's the beautiful thing about this hobby, is that, I think we use social media as almost not a guide of how to hobby, but it's almost like a guide of how others hobby. So we see how other people are hobbying, and sometimes I can forget that, like, you know what, Rob, you can take a step back from posting. You could take a step back from from trying to keep up with the Joneses and figure out who's who and what's what, and you can really just take a break, and that is the way it's felt, and with my show, usually I drop 2 episodes a week, and for the month of September, and even I think going into October, there were some weeks where I just dropped 1 episode. That was it, and I did it really without an explanation. I just didn't drop a second episode, and really that's because I don't want my content to ever feel forced. I don't want to ever feel obligated to have to put out something if it doesn't feel like it's coming from the heart. And like you said, a nice recalibration is needed, and I think we all recalibrate in a different way.
Yeah, 100%. I'm right there. And it's funny. I think that being able to step away, the cards aren't going anywhere, right? The cards are not going anywhere. We know that the printing presses are on. We know that except for a few rare cards, pretty much any card we could possibly want is going to be popping up at multiple times per year. The cards aren't going anywhere. People aren't going anywhere. I think we're better collectors. I think we're better hobbyists if we do step away from time to time and get some perspective. But I want to move on to the main reason that I wanted to talk to you tonight. I recently picked up a card. I bought it a couple of weeks ago, and it had to go through the authentication process, of course. And for whatever reason, it stayed in Florida being authenticated for what felt like a week and a half. It just sat there, right? But I finally got it. And that card is a 1959 Topps Bob Gibson rookie. It's a card that I've had multiple copies in and out of my watch list now for, I don't think it's an exaggeration to say 2 years, probably more than 2 years.
Wow.
And the reason why I never bought it up until this point is I couldn't find the right copy, or I got distracted, or I wanted something else more. And sometimes I just didn't want it as much as other times. The story behind the card is that I'm from St. Louis. I'm a big Cardinals fan, but Gibson retired when I was something like 2 years old. So I never saw him play, 3 years old. But he was my mom's favorite player. And my dad and I are close, but he's not a big sports fan. But my mom was the one that got me into sports and into the St. Louis Cardinals. And she was so into sports that when I started paying attention to football, at the time, the St. Louis football Cardinals were in town as well. And I'm just giving you some background about her, how much she enjoyed sports.
Now, what year was this when you say the St. Louis football Cardinals?
I think they left town for Arizona around 86, I think. But around 81, the Raiders go to Super Bowl 15, playing the Eagles. They were still in Oakland at this time. And for Christmas this year, I get a hooded sweatshirt with the Oakland Raiders on it. And I'm like, oh, this is thanks, Mom. But what about the Cardinals? And she goes, no, they're owned by the Bidwells, and I will not let you cheer for that team. So she just went and got an Oakland Raiders because they happened to be the good team at that time. So that just gives you an idea of how devoted to sports that she was, right? So Gibson was her guy. And I got this card as a way of honoring her. Thinking she passed away a long time ago, 2005, so 18 years ago. And and once I ordered it, about a week later, I just had this random memory pop into my mind about you talking at some point about what Mickey Mantle meant to your father. And then, as things do in life and in the hobby, one thing spins out into another thing. And next thing you know, you start thinking about this idea of cards having value beyond how much that they're worth financially, how much one can flip them for, how much you got them for and ended up trading it for, and whatever and whatnot. Do you remember talking about that on the air? The idea of your tie to Mantle through your father, and do you still sort of feel that connection? If you don't mind me asking, do you still feel that connection now?
Yeah. Wow. I'm telling you, man, I'm definitely feeling all the feelings right now, just as you're talking. even before you asked me about my dad, just you talking about your mom and you saying that, you know, she's been gone since 2005, and my father's been gone since 2014. And you know, so as you're talking about your mom, '05, I'm doing the math in my head. I'm like, okay, so that's, so right there, that's, you know, 18, 19 years that your mom's been gone. And my mind went to like, I wonder if Dave, you know, now that, you know, you have kids and now that, you know, you have a family and stuff, right? Like, um, do you look back, like throughout your day, do you wonder, like, I wonder what my mom would say to me about this? I wonder what my mom would think about this. I wonder, because I always catch myself thinking, like, what would my dad think? You know, like, what would my dad think about this Mickey Mantle card? You know, and you, what would my mom think about me finally getting this Bob Gibson card? Um, but yeah, so that's, my mind was just kind of really like spinning when you were just talking for a minute. Um, but yeah, you know, I've spoken about Mickey Mantle and my father probably a handful of times, and a handful of times might sound like a lot when I say it like that, but when I look at the fact that I'm coming up on episode 220, I've probably only spoken about Mickey Mantle and my dad, I want to say maybe 5 times. So yes, every time I've spoken about it, I absolutely remember exactly what I said, and all that good stuff. So yeah.
Isn't that amazing? I think that's sort of the beauty in some way of vintage, in that it can connect us to stuff through generations. And I have some modern cards, some ultra modern and whatnot that I hold in high esteem, that I hold in high value. But to think back to previous generations, to people who held the cards, that put the pins into the cards that now created today's modern PSA 1 because there's a pinhole in it. I love to think about the stories that the card, if the cards could talk, you know,
Mm,
what would they say? You mentioned what if my mom knew that I had the 59 Topps Gibson? I don't know if she would be. She might say she was impressed. You know, I don't really know what she would think, but we actually got her a card. My wife and I got her a card for Christmas of '04. It was a 1972 Topps Gibson. And I told the story on Dennis Zender's podcast once. Um, I'll just tell it again real quick. So got her the Gibson card, 72. She loved it. It was something that she didn't expect. And then '05 was about 6 months later is when she passed. And so a few weeks after all the hubbub of things like funerals and whatnot, I went back down to St. Louis to help my dad clean up some stuff and move some stuff around. And I'm in their room and I look in the corner of her mirror where she got dressed every day, and she's got that 72 Gibson tucked into the corner of her mirror.
wow.
And it's like, oh, that's nice. That's so nice.
Wow.
And so I grabbed it, of course, and Dad didn't care. And I've got, and still, and it's ungraded. If I graded it, it might get an authentic because it's been beat to hell. Yeah, I think we spent a couple of dollars on it or whatever else. And I would ask myself, I'm like, do I even need the rookie? Do I even need the Gibson? Because I have the 72 Topps Gibson. But I think just the collector in me wanted it in a different way. And I could have said that maybe it was for her, but really I think it was for me. But it's just kind of cool because rookie cards are just kind of cool anyway. But there is that connection too. There is that connection, and that it, just to sort of put a bow on this point that I brought up, that's something that vintage can do that I don't think other eras of cards can do yet.
Yeah. Very, very well said. And you know, and I don't know if it's, I think it's just like a combination of, because I've felt strong connections between specific cards, specific players, and my father. And I don't know if it's me trying to almost get a higher level of appreciation for this hobby and for the card that I've acquired, or if it's me trying to somehow spark a new connection with my father who's not here anymore. I think it's probably like a nice combination of both. And
Sure.
to think that I can grab an object that I've never owned before or that my father's never owned before and somehow feel new connection with my father. It's unbelievable. I mean, it's all in my head, obviously, but it's more than in my head because it's in my heart. And if I can find a player that allows me to tap into something in my heart, that's next level that I don't think all collectors get to experience.
You just held up a card. Can you tell the listeners what card you just held up?
Yeah, no, it's nothing crazy. It's a 1964 Topps Mickey Mantle. It's a Topps Giant, so it's the nice oversized version. So it's a nice big version of Mickey Mantle, and it's just him looking, his hair kind of coming from below his cap. He looks sweaty, he looks tired, he looks like he's getting older, like Mickey Mantle. You can see him through the years in his cards, and there reached like a point where he really just like turned the corner and really was just like kind of looking rough. And I think it's probably because of the partying, the success, the alcohol, a lot of that. And just it I look at him and it's like he looks like such a blue collar worker. He looks like a blue collar guy, and my that's exactly what my dad was. And yeah, I'm probably searching for some way to make this card even more meaningful than it is already to me, by saying like, man, this kind of looks like my dad. The wrinkles on the forehead, the wrinkles around the eyes. It looks like Mantle was up all night drinking. But it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if it's a reach or it's not, because for me, it does feel real. It does feel sincere. And um, I think especially when we're talking about parents, like you talking about your mom, it's like when you started talking about your mom, I immediately wanted to say like, oh man, I'm sorry for your loss. Like, it's like, but it kind of sounds crazy because it was 18 years ago, but I still feel that, so um yeah, it's yet another thing that our hobby does that is like one of these unexpected benefits. It's like, oh, okay, it's strengthening my connection with loved ones that are no longer here. That's amazing.
And that's what I really latched onto with what you said there, especially at the beginning. This idea that it's a way to connect with someone who's gone, and plus with it being vintage. And I do not claim to be a vintage collector. It's a small minority of my PC is vintage, but something that is new to us is something that was present tense to them in the past. And as I'm looking at that Mantle card that you held up, I thought about you and I thought about your dad. But even though I didn't know your dad, I don't know what he looks like. I don't even know his name. But I imagined him, was it now 58 years ago, whenever that card came out. If he were to see that now, he'd say, "Oh, I remember that." Right? It's something that he held new, that you hold that's old, but it's new to you. It's just, again, it's the beauty of vintage. The other place that my mind went is, I wonder how good Mantle would have been if he A, didn't drink, and B, never stepped on that drain. When he was so young, I cannot
Yeah.
imagine what he would have been able to accomplish. Because he for him to play with that busted knee his entire career, and then plus all the damage he did to himself after that, and still put up those numbers. I don't know. It's almost unfathomable.
No, for sure. And I mean, I think about someone like Mantle and his excessive partying and his excessive drinking and whatever else he was doing. I mean, maybe that's what he had to do, or that what he felt like he had to do in order to survive in the fishbowl that is New York City and that is New York. Because even though there wasn't social media back then, even though the media might not have been as intense as it is now, he was just his entire career, he was really playing in the shadows of giants. And, you think about Babe Ruth, Lou Gehrig, Joe DiMaggio. I mean, even Yogi Berra was there before him, and Yogi was, um, so maybe that's what it took, and just to say, like, so you mentioned that Bob Gibson card, and I could remember that card because I remember the set, I remember the card, and it's a nice picture of I believe it's a close up of him, and he's kind of like looking off in the distance, and it's a baseball field in the background, and what an incredible image, of what was her favorite player for what was her favorite team for a while.
Yeah, absolutely. It was, it was always her team, right?
Mm.
And just you can still see the sort of the sparkle in her eye when she would tell stories, because the Bob Gibson stories are sort of legendary, right? The way how intense he was on the mound, and I think one of my favorite stories is how he had a teammate who he always roomed with on the road, and that I think it was Bill White, and he got traded to Philly or somewhere like that. And the first time they played the Phillies after the trade, he basically just threw at him, right? He threw at his best friend and former roommate on the road. And afterward, he's like, "Why'd you do that?" He's just, well, "You're not my teammate anymore." Right. And there's just such that intensity there. Plus there was this, the year of the pitcher, right? 1968, the 1.12
Yeah.
ERA. And the card itself is beautiful. It's that real vivid pink background if you get the right one. For those who don't know, the one I picked up finally was an SGC 4.5. The pink is really strong. It's dead center, left to right, but probably about 2/3, 1/3 on the north and south of it. I mean, it's a 4.5. You're not going to get perfect, right? With just a minimal, if you squint, you can see some snow sort of below the right side of his cap. Very, very happy to add it to my collection. And then I started, and then I just kind of spin it forward, and I think, what will be vintage for today's kids, right? It will be, would be Mike Trout or Shohei Ohtani or Juan Soto or LeBron, depending on what sport they happen to be interested in. And will they do sort of the same thing? There's one mainstream Mickey Mantle rookie. There's the 51.
Yeah.
And, Gibson has the 59 tops. Now, not to be the get off my lawn guy, right? But there are how many Trevor Lawrence rookies are there out there? How many Juan Soto rookies are there out there? I don't know. Hundreds. How do you?
I think I've seen a couple different numbers, and which I don't even like repeating the numbers because they don't sound real, and I haven't actually factually done the research on them, but I remember hearing that Trevor Lawrence had, and this sounds insane to even say, so it feels like it can't be right, but over 5,000 different rookie cards. Think about that. How is that even possible?
Can you imagine, like, one of your kids or one of my kids saying to one of us in 30 years, like, "Dad, as you celebrate your Christmas and you're 74 years old, I really wanted to get you this white donut orange refractor sparkle out of 149. It reminds me of growing up with you. Merry Christmas."
Yeah. No, and listen, I mean, really, really cool stuff. I'm not knocking modern. There's a few slivers of the hobby that I do pick up modern. Probably no ultra modern though. I don't collect any ultra modern. I really don't buy any players that are currently playing, even for my teams. If they are playing, I do not buy their cards at all. And I don't understand exactly why, but I mean, I know that I just have a thing with nostalgia. I have this thing where, on a personal level, I love living in the moment. I try to live in the moment as much as absolutely possible with my feet both planted. But when it comes to the hobby, there's just something about looking back, and yeah, I agree. I mean, there's something so simple and so just incredible about there being a single rookie card for a player. Joe Montana had a single rookie card, as a player. Almost all of the GOATs, a single rookie card. And you know, I don't know, but I agree. I mean, what would your kids get you?
Who knows? As long as they talk to me, I'll be happy. I think that's the key. Yeah, it does feel different. It does feel different collecting an active player because, at least for me anyway, I start to hang on the box score too much, and I start thinking about the financial value of the card too much, even though it might only swing $5 here or there, especially sort of how I collect, right? It's just too nerve wracking. It's just too nerve wracking to me. I've got a couple of Otanis, I've got one Mookie, and the reason I decided to go and get a Mookie Betts is I was just, one, Scotty B cards is very convincing, but second is that I've just been so impressed by his game and his longevity and the way that he can win a Gold Glove at 5 different positions. And I thought I want to own a card of that guy. I'm someone who, like, FOMO is real, and then rather than try to stomp it out completely, I've realized that sometimes getting just one is like enough. Like, okay, I've got the card, and kind of move on. But then Dodgers get knocked out again last week. They get swept by Arizona or whoever in the playoffs. And then I see the stat that Mookie is like 3 out of his last 30 in the playoffs. And my first thought isn't about the playoffs anymore. My first thought is, why did I buy that card? But it doesn't matter. The card's going to be fine. The guy's got like 65 WAR by age 30, right? He could be in the Hall of Fame now. But
Yeah.
I don't get that, right? It's the old cliche that retired players can't get hurt. Retired players can't go into slumps. And I think I just enjoy watching current sports more if I don't have to always have this second factor in the back of my mind of, all right, well, I've got a PSA 9. Should I gone for the 10? Because now he's 4 for 5 and I can sell that tomorrow. With retired players, I just don't have to worry about it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Absolutely. And so I'm wondering, now that you have the Bob Gibson rookie, have you had, what were the thoughts, what were the feelings around thinking of your mother from when you purchased it, all the way through when you were waiting to when you have it in hand now? Were there any thoughts? Were you expecting there'd be more thoughts? Were you expecting there'd be less thoughts? Like, where are you at right now with it, and what are some of the things you felt?
It's peaceful now. It got to the point where I either had to go or get off the pot, right? Where I kept not getting it. When I had 1,000 opportunities to buy one. You can jump on eBay anytime now, and there's so many copies of these at any moment. And it got to be the point where it started to eat at me a little bit that I didn't have it. And I almost needed to acquire it, I feel, just to say, okay, that part of my collecting is done. My collecting isn't done, but that part is done. And if this really was such an important thing to me, why wasn't I doing it? And the reason why is because I'm an impatient person. I get distracted, and I see a shiny thing and I turn to the left, another shiny thing and I turn to the right, and I'm trying to work that part of me out with the hobby. But with this card, it became, as much as I wanted to own it because I love how it looks and because I thought of it was honoring her, at the same point, it became almost a weight because I hadn't bought it yet. And I feel like I couldn't move on until I bought it. But I also didn't want to buy the wrong copy. I also didn't want to pay too much for it. I know what I want out of vintage, which is centered. It needs to be reasonably centered, and it needs to have good color. I don't care if the corners are beat up at all. But it's got to have decent centering on it. And so I finally, after I moved some cards, saved some money, I put it aside, and almost miraculously for me, because I can jump at things sometimes, I said, it's time. It's just time. And I got it. And I didn't tell you this, but actually it finally arrived today. It actually came in the mail today. It was not supposed to be here until Monday, but Sure enough, they just dropped it off today, and I opened it up and I took a breath, like, okay, I love it. And as soon as I opened it, I was so happy that I owned it. Not from a relief point of view, but from like, this is a great card. And being from St. Louis and someone who has a small PC of former St. Louis athletes across all sports, to have this in my collection now feels like a part of that collection is validated. It's real. I want to add the 53 Satchel because he's wearing a St. Louis Browns cap.
Oh, love that card.
Love that card, right?
Oh.
Right.
One of the most, that Satchel page is one of the most beautiful cards in existence.
I know they had 4 or 5 different artists for that set, and whoever did the ink on that satchel, boy, did they hit it out of the park.
I tell you, you are, listening to your journey through the podcast and stuff, which let me just say, man, it's been an honor having you, release it on the Wolfpack Network, man. And the content you put out on a weekly basis is unbelievable. Like, for me, and I know it's not just for me, it's for a lot of people in the hobby, it's really become like must listen to podcast content, because I don't know what it is. It's absolutely, it's the way in which you deliver your podcast. It's definitely your voice, your tone, it's your inflection, it's the speed at which you talk, it's the stories that you paint. But it almost feels like, and I know you're not an outsider because I know you've been collecting for a while, and cards have always in some way, shape, or form been a part of your life, right? Like you were talking about with getting your mom the Bob Gibson card. But it almost feels like you are someone that is looking at the hobby from just a different perspective. It's such a unique perspective. It's almost like when like an outsider comes into a company and just shakes everything up and just changes everything. Like, you have really done that. And there have been a few of your episodes that have really stood out that have changed the way that I collect. Okay, changed the way that I collect, and also changed the way that I've done some of my content. Listening to, and I know I'm not, I know you, I'm taking this episode in a different direction real quick, so I apologize, but I just wanted to say that. I wanted to publicly really give you your flowers here, because I mean, a few episodes that really stood out were obviously you talking about all the content that you listen to. You listen to like 75 hours or 68 hours of content in 1 week, right? And those were good episodes where you were actually going through that. But I'll tell you what episode really did it for me. It was the episode that you dropped, I want to say like mid-September, where you said, listen, like, I haven't really talked about this, but I haven't consumed any content in like 3 weeks. And I needed that because it really did a number on me listening to those podcasts. And some of those podcasts really sucked. And what you didn't say that, I'm paraphrasing, but this is like what I got from it. And so many podcasts are talking about the same exact stuff. And you can't really stop that, right? You can't stop, because a big event happens or something happens, people are going to cover it. But you talked about how there were ways in which people really presented it with kid gloves, with really good like bedside manner. They were able to really talk about, the investment on what's his name, the Florida player, the Rays player.
Wander Franco.
Yeah, Wander Franco. You had talked about how some people were just complete jerks talking about that, and then some people were really, really good with talking about how with how delicate the situation that was. But I just took a lot from that. I took a lot from that episode. And when you were talking about just recently, just in the last couple of weeks, you had talked about how what if you could sell everything and start over? Sell everything. And let me tell you, that episode was one of the biggest inspirations or thing that got stuck in my head. I moved a huge card last week that I would have never moved, but I moved it because I know that I'm really curating my collection in a way that basically you gave me the courage. That episode gave me the courage to move a card that most people wouldn't have moved.
Well, thank you for all that. I'm touched, and I appreciate it. I'm honored, and I'm also excited to hear. I don't know if you're ready to talk about. Did you say which card that you moved or not yet?
I haven't. No, I haven't.
Not yet. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it was a so we're talking about Mantle. So it was actually a Mickey Mantle. It was a signed Mickey Mantle, and it was a huge one. And it was what I thought was going to be a forever card for me, but I moved it because I knew there were some big auctions ending that had some really, really cool Type 1 photos. And and I decided to do it. And I actually was able to pick up a couple Type 1 photos in last week's auction. And I didn't get the one I was going for, but it doesn't matter because your episode of like, what if you could sell everything, what would you keep, what wouldn't you keep? And it made sense for me to do it. And it felt like, you know what, I know I might not be able to get this exact card back, but I know I can get something even better, even something that would really, really bring out the feels. Because at the end of the day, the one Mantle I'm chasing is the 51 Bowman. I've already owned 2 copies, but neither of them were my forever copies. And I got them knowing they were just going to be placeholders. So I'm still waiting on that 51 Bowman centered Mickey Mantle rookie. That's the one.
Yeah, and you'll get it. And congrats on having the sort of the knowledge and the courage to move that other one. That's really great to hear. I ended up not doing it. Moving all of my stuff. I would have been left with basically nothing. And I thought that's not a place that I really want to go yet on that, but it's coming. And for those who didn't hear it, what I'm seeking out at some point is the 1948 Leaf Jackie Robinson. Yes, I know it came out in 49, but it's still it's the 48 Leaf Jackie Robinson. And I just got some really good advice from people. I asked on the show, I said, who can, I said, I'd love to hear from all of you, or as many of you, or your thoughts. And there was just wonderful, thoughtful points made on all sides, stuff that I thought about, stuff that I had never thought about, different perspectives. And finally, a couple of people said, just slow down. You'll get there. There's no reason that I have to get that in 2023. I'm in my 40s. I'm not in my 80s or my 90s. It's going to come around.
Well, and I know that you just started that envelope, right? You just started dropping 20s in your envelope, so
yep,
you'll get there.
Yeah, we'll get there, and that's the goal. The thing with the content, that was a fun experiment that will never happen again. It was I think it was 62 podcasts that totaled 55 hours in a week. Just want to see what it would be like. Now I've seen. And now I move on. But yeah, it really, but it also to sort of spin it forward, it really made me appreciate people who are thoughtful with their content, and who are thoughtful who don't even have content. I just really want to give a shout out to all the people in the hobby, which is about 99% of them, who don't put out content, but are just kind and thoughtful and have some really good ideas out there as well. But for those who do put themselves out there, who feel the need to broaden their hobby experience by talking about it either on YouTube or on podcast or Instagram or Twitter in some other way, to those who are creative about it, who you can tell are putting some thought into it, who are careful. I mean, basically every Wolfpack member, Brett from Stacking Slabs and 20 others who I don't want to start listing people now who I do think highly of, because all of a sudden you realize, he left out a name, and I don't want to get into that, but stepping away, much like some of us are taking sort of a breather a few months after National to sort of to reset. Stepping away from content was sort of the same thing. And now I still listen to it every day, but I listen to less every day. And I draw inspiration from those who talk in ways that are respectful and thoughtful, but also, come from an angle that I hadn't necessarily considered. And for those who decide to talk about the news, somebody is suing somebody else or whatever, Panini, Fanatics, all that stuff. You mentioned the ones that were really thoughtful about it. The one that I just want to give one more shout out to were the people from Let Me Get That Potograph, which is Drew Herndon and Scott. And I can't think of Scott's last name at the moment. But the day that they talked about Wander Franco and those allegations against him, boy, I remember I was driving home from work and I saw what I had to go. There's the one day I had to go into the office that week because I was home. It was during the summer, teacher. And I saw it was another thing about Wander Franco. And I thought, oh God, here we go. I think I just listened to 2 in a row. Here's a third one. And they start laying out all of their sources. They start saying, we got this from here. We got this from here. We don't know this. We do know this. Here's the sourcing on this. This person reported that. We don't know this yet, so we're not going to say that. This is a really sensitive subject. We're not going to talk about his value until the end. And I was almost in my car, like throwing my hands up, like, thank you. This is all they had to do was have some respect for their listeners. And for those who do want to go that route, I hope that they listen to Scott and Drew. For those who want to do the non-evergreen content, who want to talk about the news, which I think there definitely needs to be. There is a place for that. And so I really sort of figured out what I liked and what I don't.
Yeah. No, well, listen, man, you've continued to do great things just on the hobby content front, whether if it's your podcast and sharing every day, sharing the daily podcasts that are released. I mean, that's a wonderful thing. I mean, it's nothing else I could say, man. It's awesome to see that because really there's no one else doing that, and it's a super selfless thing. And I think, and I could be wrong, but you starting to do that, I think, kind of got you warmed up for people getting to know who you are, which might have then been some of the final pieces for you to say, you know what, I think I'm going to start a show. I think I'm going to start some of my own content.
Yeah, no doubt. So as we're recording this, it's starting to get late. So I just want to ask you one more question and then I'll let you go.
All right.
And I did not tell you I was going to ask this. It just popped into my head now. So around, New Year's of last year, you put out this little graphic that you posted on Instagram for people to list some cards that they want to acquire in 2023. We are now about 2.5 months from the end of the year. And who was it? Might have been Bleecker. I think it was Bleecker earlier this week reposted your graphic, which I hadn't seen in months. And they were crossing things off.
Yeah.
Did you expect to see that? Did you expect somebody to come back to that graphic that you posted about what your ambitions were for 2023? And now that you've seen it, now that Bleecker went and did it, would you like to see more, to see how people, whether they got their cards or not?
Oh yeah, I would love to. Without a doubt, I would love to. It was nice to see that Luke did that, from Bleecker Street Cards. That was awesome. So I think 2023 was the third year I had done that and posted that up. 21 was the first year I did it. And I tell you, throughout the year, I will randomly get messages from people referencing their list. And so it told me that, okay, like this list, I think, has kind of struck a nerve with people. And I know people, they put out what their, New Year's resolutions cards are and what their chase cards are and stuff, I thought by creating like a little form that you can very easily just add text over and post was really cool. Me being a psychotherapist by day job, I believe in numerous things that this list incorporates. First of all, I absolutely believe in the law of attraction. I believe that if you put something out in the universe, I believe that that you have a slightly better chance of obtaining that or getting that. Um, and I also believe in with my job with all my clients. I mean, we have treatment plans. So, I'm all about documentation. I'm all about documenting something and then coming back to it to review and say like, okay, this was the plan, this was the goal, this was the plan, how we were going to achieve that goal. So for the review, where are we at regarding this? So documenting things is something that is a major part of my job. So I'm like, okay, law of attraction, that covers the spiritual side. Actually, creating the list and having people write it down. Okay, that's that's the documentation. Like, so the whole thing just kind of felt right, and it's so weird because, you know, I could post that list on, a Tuesday morning, and for all I know, I'll get 300 to 500 responses on it, and then, on New Year's Day or something. But if I post it on a Saturday night, maybe there aren't a lot of people online, so I'll only get 30. So, it's like one of these things where, just like with the Instagram algorithms, you never know what's going to catch on and what's not going to. But I know that it definitely tapped into something because, like I said, throughout the year, people will email me or DM me and say like, "Hey man, I got this list, knocked it off the list," and randomly people will just like mention it to me, and I'll be like, "Oh, that's cool. I didn't even know you knew about that list. I don't even think you filled one out, but it's pretty cool that it was on your radar." So,
Rob, this has been fantastic.
yeah,
Continued success to you, and thanks for coming on.
thank you.